these talks really, I think, come out of course, the U.S. Strike and killing of Qasem Soleimani, as well as Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis earlier this year, and other Iraqis. And really, what for the last few years was a prime minister in Iraq that the U.S. was unable to get, the U.S. was unable to deal with, and was not happy with. But what you have now is a new prime minister in Iraq, Mustafa al-Kadhimi, who's actually a close friend of the U.S. And so that sort of need to reassess, and the kind of all things on the table element of sort of when Secretary of State Pompeo came out, that's kind of receded now. Now it's just a conversation of what that relationship between the US and Iraq should look like, particularly with this government. On the American side as well, I think particularly with the Trump administration, a lot of this is about Iran, whether they admit it or they don't admit it. The concern has been whether Iraq can prosper as a country not kind of sucked into Iran's sphere of influence in that way. And the Trump administration particularly is looking to combat Iran in many different arenas, Iraq being the biggest one of those arenas. Relations with the US is not a big crisis for Iraq right now. I mean, US influence has declined. If we were having this conversation 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it would be a much bigger deal what the US and Iraqi governments actually come to. But today, with US influence waning, really the Iraqi government is facing a massive economic crisis with as I mentioned, the oil price decline. It might be unable to pay its public servants, right? And a massive part of the Iraqi public authority is giving people jobs through the state, through the public sector. If it's unable to provide this employment, it'll face a bigger crisis. And you've seen protests since October 2019 really erupting throughout Iraq and really questioning the basis of the state-society relations in Iraq. Those protests aren't going anywhere. Behind closed doors, many Iraqi politicians don't want US troops to leave. Including those that might publicly say that. Because first of all, US troops are important to fighting against ISIS, which is still continuing. ISIS attacks in the first part of this year have increased, and so you're seeing a resurgence almost of ISIS activity in some of those areas. And also there's this lesson, I mean, President Obama in 2011 decided to withdraw US troops. And a lot of people point the resurgence of ISIS towards that decision. I think that's a bit too much of a stretch. I think it was, the failures, again, of the roots that we've been talking about, of public authority that led to ISIS. But in any case, Iraq is unable to govern its territory. Iraq is unable to fight ISIS yet in its current capacity. And so many Iraqi politicians want to continue to rely on that. But also, more importantly, many Iraqi politicians are concerned with Iranian influence in their country, right? And so being able to balance, and this is something that, for example, former Prime Minister al-Abadi was able to do to some extent, which is to balance one against the other. And the new Prime Minister, I think, in conversations I've had with him in the past, as well as with his team, is quite keen on that balancing role.